Many men are living secret lives. They carry with them a secret world of inner feelings, including sadness, anger, fear, and shame. But more than ever before, men from all walks of life are entering into therapy for the first time and sharing secrets about themselves. It's an unfamiliar and vulnerable place to be. Today, we're going to talk to psychotherapist Jame Hawes about the secret emotional lives of men, what it means to be a man, and how men can train themselves to build better emotional fitness. Welcome to episode 8 of Better Brain, Better You. Welcome to the podcast, James. It's great to have you here.
Great, thanks for having me.
So, very much enjoyed your book, The Secret Lives of Men. So, I love the title. So, do men have secret lives?
Well, in the book, you may have noticed. I mean, there's often this idea that women are a mystery, and that it will take thousands of books to understand that mystery.
Yeah.
And I kind of turned that around because I think we as men are the mystery.
Uh-huh.
And I think one of the reasons for that is that we struggle to talk about what's going on inside of our heads. So often women will say, "What are you thinking?" Or "What's going on?" And we don't know often.
Yeah.
We say nothing, stuff like that. So I suppose that sense is, I think men are a mystery to themselves,
Uh-huh.
and we're generally a mystery to other people, and certainly, almost definitely, to most women.
Okay. And do you think it means something to be different, a man today, than perhaps it was years ago? Or
I think there's different expectations in terms of relationships of men. I mean, before it was classically, wasn't it? And I think about my father, is the classic protector and provider. They go out to work and they bring their money home and they give some money to the wife, the housewife, and she does look after the house, and he might go to the pub or whatever, and that was it. That was okay. But nowadays, I think in terms of modern healthy relationships, there's more expectations on men to be a bit more engaged, a lot more engaged in the home, in building relationship, and of course, a lot of women now go out to work as well. So we both work. And I think there's been definitely more expectation on men's, emotional health and emotional connection with women. They want more of that, I think. Yeah.
And do you think men are struggling to sort of find their identity in that kind of the new expectations of them?
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think men, I think we've changed. I think more modern men, we've got a bit more connected, and we've rose to those expectations. But in my work with hundreds of men, I kind of still, and couples, I still see a lot of issues that actually men are emotionally mute. They're not kind of doing much of the emotional work in the relationship. And so that I think they're struggling. And I think women are struggling as well, because they kind of want this, and this is one of the points of writing the book. I think a lot of women in relationship with men, they want a man who's more emotionally connected. But my experience was that, the wife, the partner may send the man to go and get some therapy, become more emotionally fit, as I say. They become more emotionally fit, they go home, and they start talking about their vulnerable feelings, and then they hear the message, "Well, man up, mate, I don't want to hear that." And so why is that? Well, because most women have been brought up in their family of origin with a father who is generally emotionally distant. He might be good at doing DIY or whatever. So their understanding and their expectation of a man is, well, he does all that and actually he's distant but he's strong. But they know that in a modern relationship they want more from a man. So it ends up being confused. So my view is that if women want men to change, women need to change their expectations as well. And to actually, okay, can I embrace a man's vulnerability? Can I be with him when he is, we might say, weak? He shows his emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a difficult thing for a lot of women.
I mean, it's interesting you said you use that phrase "weak." I mean, that's what I wonder whether a lot of men, when they come to see you or if they're considering their feelings and coming to talk to you about their feelings, their relationships, and so on, do they often present that way where they feel weak? And in fact, just picking up on what you said there, do their wives often perceive them as weak as well for needing help?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite confusing, isn't it? I think, well, and even saying that language, I mean, that language is a kind of almost the language on the street. Still I hear boys say this, that, showing your vulnerable emotions is weakness. Mm-hmm. And I kind of don't, clearly I don't like that, because I think actually to show your emotions your vulnerable emotions takes courage, real strength.
Yeah.
But I've sat with boys, and I sat with a man not so long ago, and that phrase, and I think I put it in the book, kindness is weakness, And this is the stuff of, well, if I show kindness, if I show love, it's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And because I could be perceived as weak, and then I could be perceived as vulnerable, and then I could be attacked, and then I could be rejected.
Yeah.
So I think however men have evolved in the last 50 or 60 years, and we clearly in society we have changed somewhat. I would still contest whether men have evolved much in terms of their emotional well-being.
Okay. Something else that you say there as well, so that piqued my interest. So being rejected, I'm thinking of my own feelings there, my own sort of vulnerabilities. That kind of, that's perhaps one of the biggest, or a big barrier to men sort of embracing, your approach, because this idea of being vulnerable and being kind of willing to put yourself out there and be kind of vulnerable and show your emotions. But I think particularly if you've had a distant parents when you're younger, and that kind of experience, it's actually it's hard to push yourself into these situations where you might be rejected.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think for me, men showing their vulnerable feelings is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
It's almost like because we've learned and we've built up these kind of strong external projections. And ultimately to emotionally protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, well, what? Now you want me to be vulnerable? Now you want me to share some of this? It's frightening, because they have learned, and I think I mentioned it in the book, and I think what most men learn very early on, and I think they learn it from their fathers, is emotional self-reliance.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to deal with this in myself, because. Or I'll go to the classic cave, because if I dare say something that I need help, or that I share my anxiety, or I cry, that is frightening, because we don't know what the other is going to say.
Yeah.
And we've had the messages, big boys don't cry, or don't be weak, don't be a sissy, don't be a girl, don't be whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's frightening to, those rules, we call it the man rules, are really, it's almost like it's like the gender police almost, the idea that,
right.
Don't you dare show those emotions, because you are going to be, I talk about it in the book, you are going to be shamed.
Yeah.
You are, and that's that kind of real man discourse.
There's actually two things that you've said there. So, what are the different ways that men do? So you mentioned the man cave was the first. The man cave and shame were the two things that I wanted to pick up on. Then you talked about. So what are the, other than the man cave, what are the different ways in which men do sort of this kind of manifestation of protecting themselves and not being vulnerable? So people listening and watching might be able to kind of identify different ways in which when people are expressing that kind of defense mechanism.
Yes. Well, I think one of the main ways in terms of emotions is anger.
Right.
So, and I call it our emotional defense system. And what are we defending ourselves against? Well, we're defending ourselves against expressing those vulnerable, so-called smaller feelings.
Yeah.
Anger generally is seen as a strong emotion, and that's often all we've got as men. So I often say that our anger may seep out or it may explode out, you know, and so that is our classic, if you want, defense system, you know, or not talking, being absolutely mute, you know, moody, you know, a kind of passive aggressive, kind of quite controlling behaviour that most of us are fairly good at. You know, most relationships have some of that in it because it's the unspoken. It's difficult to share our truth, to share what we.
And is the anger always kind of overt anger, or is it?
No, I think it's covert. It's passive. You know, I think we men. Yes, you know, whenever I talk about anger, you know, men and most people would think about the aggressive or the rage. You know, it's the externalization of it. But actually, I think most of us men, we attack ourselves. You know, I call it passive anger. We turn it in and we beat ourselves up, and that's what we do when we go. If we have this so-called idea of the psychological man cave, we go away and we whip ourselves, we beat ourselves. We shame ourselves because we've made a mistake, we've kind of let something out, and then we come back, you know, often, you know, come back into the situation, everything's back to normal, as it were, you know. Yeah. So I think, and I always say that kind of psychological man cave is unhealthy. It's not a healthy way, and I think, just to add on to your original question, the other thing I think that what men do to deal with difficult emotions is that they look for external comforters. You know, so this idea that how, when I'm in pain or when I'm struggling with something, if I can't speak, if I can't say it, can't look for help for my emotional kind of difficulties or wounds, we go for the comforters, which are things like, you know, sex, alcohol, drugs, gambling, work, you know, anything that we're going to spend a lot of time in, and we either intoxicate ourselves or we just get a lot of rewards from. So work, you know, men, you know, always working, you know, got to get better and better because it makes us feel good generally. You know?
Yeah. So the other concept that is really interesting, so the other concept that you were talking about, though, you briefly mentioned, was shame. Yes. So, could you just unpack a bit what you mean by that and how that kind of is expressed?
Yep. So, like with all emotions, I generally feel, and we could talk about this more, that emotions are neither positive or negative,
right?
You know, but there is a healthy way of expressing an emotion, and there's an unhealthy way of expressing an emotion. Yeah. So if we look at shame in its healthy sense is it's almost like when we have a set of values. Perhaps most of us, you know, shameless people don't. You know, they've not got enough shame. Yeah. But generally, if we've got some healthy shame, it means that, you know, we've got a set of values, we've got some principles or morals or whatever. Now, when we go against...
So what was examples do you mean by healthy shame?
So in terms of, if I have a value, say, okay, let's just look at in marriage. So I'm married. Now, if I've made a commitment to my wife in marriage. Now, if I to not go out, have sex outside the marriage, say. Yeah. So if I was to have sex outside the marriage... I broke that kind of covenant or that agreement or whatever, and shame, healthy shame, would say, James, you've done something wrong here, right? And I need to listen to that and say, oh yeah, that's gone against my values.
So your values, your morals.
So I need to either adjust my behaviour or admit what I've done. That's shame that is healthy.
Okay.
So, toxic shame, as I'd say, or an unhealthy shame, would be shame that has come from outside of us, so the external. So classically, we may have experienced that as a child, by our parents who or would have said, or some teacher or whatever adult, or even a peer, have told us, have exposed us for doing something that we thought was just perfectly natural, in with our own understanding of shame, and they have told us or got angry with us to say, you don't do that.
Okay.
That's not good. You are you're bad for doing that or expressing that in some way.
And that's distinct from you run out in the road and don't do that because that's going to hurt you, to something that's...
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, because there's that sense, well, if your child ran out on the road and you verbally abused them...
Right.
And mocked them, or then told them all in front of your friends later. That's obviously shame, really shaming for that child.
Yeah.
If we get a caring and thoughtful response and a loving response, well, of course, that's not shame. So I think there's that what we've learned, but I also explore in the book this idea of gender shame, the idea of what we have learned about being a man.
Okay.
Where we've learned that. So the classic thing of the real man discourse. The idea that, well, if you want to be a real man, you've got to tick this box, tick this box, tick this box. Otherwise, you're not really going to be part of the story. So we can live in kind of fear in terms of, well, I better make sure I check all that because I want to be a real man. I don't want to be less than a man.
Yeah.
So I explore that sense of that. I think masculinity is generally quite slippery, and so we have to keep on proving ourselves and keep on this is when maybe we haven't got in touch with our masculinity. So this idea, I've got to keep making sure, I'll be vigilant, I must do that, mustn't show any emotion because that would be shaming, and I'm gonna be chucked out of the real man kind of club or tribe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think in some of the ways you sort of characterise it then sort of feels very much like the sort of, the kind of relationship pressures that you might have for being a real man, both with your friends and your partner, and historically, and even maybe sort of societal pressures as well that might make you behave that way. I mean, is that how you sort of see it? And also, are they still there in the modern world, given the sort of contemporary society now? We've moved on, hopefully, from the old days of masculinity and moving forward to something a bit more progressive and a bit more balanced.
Yes, you would hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
My problem is, and I get this question all the time about, well, we've moved on, haven't we?
Yeah.
And actually, I work with teenage boys every week.
Right.
And I don't see this. I do see a sense of that the boys, there's definitely a sense of that I think they want to, and they want to be more connected with themselves and with other people. They want to be warmer.
Yeah.
But there's generally the rules in the peers are all there.
Okay.
In terms of you don't go against the rules. You don't step out of what we consider to be to be a boy, to be a boy or be a man. So
Yeah. And that, so I'm just thinking, as you reach adulthood, perhaps when you've experienced that shame as a child or even earlier in your life, that comes out. How is that kind of manifested, and or how can that be manifested once you reach adulthood?
So what? Well, yeah, okay. So in terms of how does that shame affect us in terms of when?
So you've experienced that shame as a child, something in these kind of situations, presumably repeatedly for behaving in a particular way that sits with you, and then you develop, you grow up, you start to try and form relationships with people, and presumably. That can come out in particular ways that are not necessarily healthy. Yes,
and I think it reduces us. And it kind of generally, it's a bit like we end up hiding internally.
Yeah.
And this is a big thing in terms of relationships, because I think men can often become emotionally invisible.
Right.
And, because we don't, and therefore, when we can expose ourselves, share ourselves, that's a way of showing resilience, if you like. And if we know that when we share our inner selves, our vulnerability, and it's accepted, or there's some empathy from someone else, that's amazing. That's kind of how we learn, okay, it's safe to actually share all these things which I've been taught, and actually other people, can understand that. And I talk sometimes about having men in men's groups, and I think, because if we as men, we don't talk to each other about our feelings, we think we're the only one. I'm the only one, I must be weird, I bet no other man thinks like this.
Right.
You put them in a group, and I call it de-shaming. So as soon as, in my experience of working with men in groups, we start talking about feelings of vulnerability, and you see, one man do it, he takes the courage, and all the other men, that's me. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And so that's a really powerful encounter, and a de-shamer.
Yeah.
Because they're thinking, oh my God, I've been living all these years, and I thought I was the only one, and all these other men are having exactly the same thoughts.
That must be an incredibly powerful, profound experience for them to really, to realise it's a shared experience, and not something they've just been holding on their own, right?
Absolutely. That kind of normalisation, that idea of we're all in this, we're all like this, and it's such a beautiful thing, as you say. And I've seen tears and men, and just almost like their body just relaxes. Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Wow.
It isn't just me then.
Yeah.
It's almost a wake up,
Yeah. So just thinking, so we've talked a little bit about kind of masculinity, how that's expressed in healthy and unhealthy ways, and some of the ways in which some of those childhood experiences can be expressed in adulthood and so on. Shame being, one of the more profound ones. I'm just sort of wondering for a man or for a woman or for families listening and watching to this, who this is resonating with them, what you're talking about here with those kind of experiences. What's the first sort of step here you think, that you would advise, if you like, people to take, to start on this journey of of emotional fitness, I think you call it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that I think people get to a stage in their life, don't they? And I often see men, it's almost like when they hit a crisis, when they haven't got any resources left, they don't know what to do, which again is quite a frightening position for a lot of us as men, because generally we're self-reliant. We feel we've always got resources. I mean, so for me, it's like when we're ready, or when ultimately when maybe there's a crisis in our world. It's like, for me, it's starting that work of emotional fitness, and the first part of that is about awareness. Start waking up to actually I can't and I don't want to avoid these feelings anymore.
Right. That's often when people might come to you in the first instance. So an event in their life, or really the feelings have just become so overwhelming that they seek help. Yeah,
I think it's like when they've done everything else that they thought would help, they might have already started on some medication, but they want to actually think, well, okay, I don't want to be like this now, and I want to deal with it. Now, there's definitely some men who come to me and I think they see counselling or therapy a bit like a garage. So they want to drop the car off for a service or an MOT. They want to get the oil changed and the kind of brake pads sorted, so they're saying to me, "Fix me, James. You do it."
Yeah.
So they're kind of this idea that I haven't got any more resources. So I do now need to go to someone else, and maybe they made that kind of child-parent kind of idea there. So they're there instead of actually kind of saying, well, actually, you need to look after yourself and you need to do this work. That's why I kind of like the idea of emotional fitness. Trying to bring a parity between physical fitness. This idea that if we want to get physically fit, we know that it's going to take discipline, it's going to take exercise, we're going to have to tone up some flabby muscles.
Yeah.
It's the same for me with emotional fitness, that, you know, we need to exercise some muscles that we haven't exercised before.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, you're going to have to basically get into discipline. You know, you're going to have to do this on an everyday basis.
And just to go back to your sort of garage analogy, if you like, that if you know, in the garage there's a toolbox typically, and presumably, you know, you're going to need to build that. In this case, in emotional fitness, a kind of emotional tools, if you like, to become fitter. I just wonder if you could share some of that.
Yeah, so in the book I talk about this program, if you like, bit like I would say, you know, Couch to 5K, the idea. So the fitness program, which I call Aware. So, you know, some of the tools, you know, I mean, you know, I can just break a few of those down. The first one is this kind of giving attention to our tension. So actually, okay, we're feeling there's something going on, or I've got some niggle in my body, you know, which might be an emotional connection. Yeah. Instead of avoiding it, I need to stay with it and give it some attention. Okay. And so I'm becoming a lot more aware of that feeling, uncomfortable feeling, that discomfort, and I'm going to give it some attention. So I often say to men, look, the first part here is to generate a regular pattern of checking in with yourself. Okay. So it might be, you know, okay, I'm going to check in. I'm talking about checking. It might be a minute, it might be 5 minutes. So when you go to the toilet, instead of standing up, sit down and just check in with yourself. You know, go, how do I feel? Yeah. What's going on here? You know, I just had that difficult situation with my colleague, and I felt something there. So let's stay with that rather than suppressing it, avoiding it, pushing it away. So that would
is that becoming much more in touch with the physical feelings, your feelings you're actually physically feeling?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I suppose my stuff about the body as well is that for us as men, we've learned generally to beat our bodies, work our bodies, build our bodies. Few of us have learned to listen to our bodies. And I would kind of say, you know, the body and the emotion are one. Yeah. So if we learn to listen to our bodies more, we've got more of a connection. I think there is a female advantage here in terms of bodily connection because, as I say on some of my workshops, you know, women bleed. You know, they have a rhythm. They connect with their bodies. Yeah. You know, they may give birth, so their whole body's changing. Yeah. Us men, you know, we might just get fatter. Yeah. That's about it, really. You know, and so we're not engaged. We're not attuned.
We're not as in tune with
to our bodies. Yeah. So that for me is really important. Can we, you know, instead of avoiding even physical pain, which again a lot of us men do, give it attention, stay with it, and if you need to get help. You know, again, men classically, we don't go to the GP, we don't ask for help. Yeah. Men die younger because of this. So getting more connected with the body, checking in with your body, checking in with your feelings, really important stuff. Yeah.
Your aware program then, so if you could unpack that a bit further, what you mean?
Yeah, so I mean, so we've just talked about, you know, the first part of aware, attention, giving attention to our tensions. Yeah. You know, and that idea of, you know, checking in with ourselves. I often also say that, you know, men, we need to kind of watch ourselves more. It's a bit like the face. So we explore. You know, often men, we've learned to have a poker face, just a straight face, default face, you know, resting face, as they say. Yeah. You know, and I found my resting face when I'm in the rearview mirror in my car, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that's what people see. Yeah. You know, and is that what I'm presenting? So I often talk about maybe checking in with our face when we go to the bathroom. Yeah. You know, what is your face saying? Is your face matched your external appearance, or your sharing with the world? Is that what you feel on the inside? Because I hear a lot of men say, well, you know, your face might, you know, you might look quite angry, but then you ask them, well, no, I'm not angry. Yeah. Well, so what's going on there? Because that's what you're projecting.
I have that experience a lot in my life.
Yeah. So because we've learned that, and my resting face is generally, I think, quite sad. And you get these classic people who are, you know, they wear a happy face. Well, they're not happy all the time. Of course they're not. That's not normal or even healthy. But people are attracted to these people because they appear to be quite happy all the time. People maybe aren't attracted to me so much. So that's the first one. The second one is word bank.
Yeah.
So W for word bank. So this is really important to me, you know, because it's like in therapy, I very rarely ask men how they feel.
Okay.
Because if I do, they'll probably give me words like okay, not bad, fine, all right, normal.
Yeah.
That's all they've got.
Yeah.
And so in the book, I talk about feelings kind of as a foreign language.
Yeah.
That if we don't have many words for feelings, so if we're going to become more emotionally fit, we need to learn more basic. It's basic kind of boring discipline, really.
Emotional language.
Yeah, we need to learn more vocabulary.
Yeah.
So the idea in the book, and I mean, most people can download these on the off the Google internet, is these feeling wheels. You know, it's kind of a wheel with maybe 7 key emotions. Then they go out with another maybe 20 words on each spoke.
Yeah.
So, and what I would say to people is like, when you have your check-in, man, get your wheel out on your phone, and can you label your feeling at that moment?
Yeah.
Because once we label it, and that for me that's really important, is that if we can label a feeling,
Yeah.
you know, and if we allow ourselves to feel the feeling,
Yeah.
that feeling can disperse.
Yeah.
I often say the only thing a feeling wants is to be felt, and when it's felt, it can disperse.
Yeah.
So that's one way of using the feeling wheel. The second thing I say to kind of just grow this vocabulary is that every day, take 3 of those words off that feeling wheel. It could be an anger word, maybe a sad word, could be a happy word if you want, and build those into your vocabulary as you throughout the day. So if you're talking to your partner, your colleague, your children, just build those words in.
Yeah.
You know, and so it becomes like learning a foreign language.
Yeah, expanding your emotional vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people can read all about your kind of aware strategy in your book, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. It's in the book is kind of in 3 parts, you know, and the third part is the 10 keys.
Yeah.
Unlocking how to unlock the mystery. And the first chapter for me is the key chapter in the whole book, really, which is feelings like a foreign language. That's key one, and therefore men needs to develop emotional fitness.
Yeah. We've discussed, you know, almost exclusively men, but presumably some of these principles apply to women, you know, and perhaps even more importantly to relationships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, in the book I kind of explore this stuff about relational fitness, you know, and so are we relationally connecting and growing as a couple?
Yeah.
And so this idea of, I think lots of couples have fell into this functionality. You know, we function quite well together, but there's no growth.
Yeah.
And so the relationships have just kind of stopped.
Yeah.
And that's when people start to move away from each other, and they then might build up hurts, build walls, and then kind of just throw a grenade over every so often. And it's almost like, well, how do we develop psychological intimacy? How do we grow our relationship? And I think this idea of most of us would put a lot of time into different types of planning, you know, be it business planning, be it if we want to extend our house or do DIY projects, or if we want to go on holiday, we're spending hours planning for that.
Yeah.
But how many of us at the beginning of a year or wherever will we sit down and say, do you know what, we're going to look at a kind of plan for our relationship. We're going to, where do we want to be at the end of this year, relationally?
Right. So that almost sounds functional, the way you sort of describe that there, as if you're sort of planning your year out. But you know, I understand the sort of, you know, the concept. You want to work at, absolutely put some time and effort into your relationship if you've been struggling, if the intimacy isn't there. But that presumably isn't what you mean by...
Yeah, no, I think, you know, the idea of functional is almost like we've just fell into a pattern, a way of being that we don't think about the relationship. We don't put any energy into it. We don't need to service it, you know, in that sense. It just is what it is. Yeah. Well, what I'm talking about in terms of you know, psychological intimacy is that we have to be intentional. We have to, you know, intend and say to each other, we want to look and think and talk about our relationship, nothing else, just our relationship. And if that means that, you know, the idea of making a contract of, you know, or where do we want to be in the next year, for me that is, it's not something that is going to tie us in, but it's kind of a way to expand us.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Yeah. In the same way as, we're kind of talking about those, those childhood experiences and how they kind of express themselves once you reach adulthood, and one of those was shame that we talked about. I'm just wondering the ways in which they might sort of infiltrate into relationships as well, and the kind of roles that you sort of take in those relationships.
Yeah, well, I think it's almost like the shame antenna is fairly high, I think, for men in terms of relationships. We've come into a relationship with our coping strategies, our way of dealing with stuff, a way of avoiding kind of shame.
Yeah.
And of course, in a day-to-day relationship, that other person's going to be unintentionally perhaps prodding us in some way because of the way they do things, or their questions, or their expectations of us.
We've all got our own histories and our own expectations of what, right? So,
exactly. So we bring all of our baggage in there, and then with there's that sense of that could trigger something. I mean, I'm thinking of a story, in my own situation. So like, I'm fairly good at DIY. I trained as a carpenter early on in my life. I think I know what I'm doing. And, so I put in a flat pack of something up, as we do, and because I probably was making a mistake. So my wife is there looking over, and she's watching me, and which I felt a bit nervous about.
Yeah.
But then she kind of says, "Oh, shouldn't that be there?"
Yeah.
And where did I go? Right to shame, so in a bit of rage.
Yeah.
How dare you tell me?
Yeah.
Because I went into a small place. Shit, she's right.
Yeah.
She's got that right. And so I went into, I shouldn't be wrong.
Yeah.
And so that was a shame attack for me.
That absolutely resonates with me. That one, and I think a lot with many men. To sort of finish up with just thinking about, how sort of applicable, your principles are, and, developing emotional fitness and getting more in touch with the kind of physical feelings, and expanding your emotional vocabulary. How do you think this is sort of applicable to all men? And in particular, I'm thinking of what is there a type of man that comes to see you for help? Is there a type of man that needs help with this, or is this does this just apply to all men?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's a big question, isn't it? But I would generally say yes, it applies to all men.
Okay.
Now, of course, there are men out there who have done quite a lot of work and are emotionally connected.
Yeah.
Of course they are. So I would say, generally, the male population, they're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
But I think for me, for the majority of men, they lack emotional fitness.
Yeah.
Even men who are, classically, people say to me, "Oh, well, what about gay men? Are they not more connected to their emotions?"
Yeah.
And I say no, I don't think they are. And I've worked with several gay men. Because I think, look, most gay men have had heterosexual parents. They've been brought up in a heteronormative society.
Yeah.
So the whole messages about their masculinity are still the same, and they've had to actually do a hell of a lot more work even the coming out. And of course, they're not playing by the grill man rules. Yeah. But So I think generally most men lack in emotional fitness.
Would it be a good analogy to sort of think of building your emotional fitness is similar to sort of building to your physical muscles, like when you go to the gym or you do exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been playing around with language for many years in terms of men and emotions, and so that idea of a EQ gym or an emotional heavyweight or toning up those muscles, I think are really important. I often use the idea that, look, if I was working weights and I just worked one arm, I'd get a massive bicep. And that's kind of what men, in terms of the anger muscle, it's huge.
Right.
It's massive. The rest of the body's quite puny.
Yeah.
So we need to work on those, the sadness muscles, the anxiety muscles, the shame muscles, the hurt muscles, because otherwise we're just going to be a bit lopsided.
Yeah. That's a great way of describing it. Thank you so much for coming today, James. It's been really, really enjoyable. I've loved reading your book and loved hearing all about your knowledge and insight about men and their psychological well-being. So if people want to grab your book or want to get more information about the issues that you're talking about, where will be the best place for them to look?
Well, thanks, Ben, also for having me here. I've really enjoyed it. That's been great. And if people want to look at the book, I think the best place would be on Amazon. You know, you can read a lot about the book. You can have a look inside the book. There's a kind of Kindle version there, and there's a paperback version you can get off Amazon. If people wanted to get the book from another place, they can get it from me directly. Okay. We can leave the details at the bottom of the podcast.
Thank you, James. I'm sure people, both men and women, will really enjoy reading your book and learn a lot about themselves. And thank you to you for tuning in today, wherever you're listening or watching. I hope you enjoyed this special episode on the secret lives of men, and I'll see you in the next episode.